Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for coming to tonight's George and Matilda Fowler lecture. I'm Christopher Micklig, Associate Professor in the Department of Art here at the College of Design and School of Art and Design here at the University of Oregon. And I have the incredible pleasure today of introducing tonight's special speaker, Mario Ybarra Jr. I also want to take a moment to recognize that the land, that the places that the University of Oregon uses to live and work in is the occupied territory of the Kalapuya people. With today's gathering and with the work that we do here daily, we acknowledge that our occupation and pay respect to the Kalapuya people and the Confederate tribes of the Rio of the Grand Ronde as the past, present, and future stewards of this land. Mario Ybarra Jr. is here at the University of Oregon this week, in large part because of the generous support from the George and Matilda Fowler Lecture Endowment Fund, which was established in 2002 by Constance Fowler in memory of her parents to promote a wider understanding of the ideas that inform art. In particular, Ms. Fowler wanted students with limited exposure to art to be able to hear from artists and scholars who challenge conventions. Mario Ybarra Jr. is a visual and performance artist, educator, and activist who combines street culture with fine art in order to produce what he calls contemporary art that is filtered through a Mexican-American experience in Los Angeles. His work has been included in many group exhibitions, including installations inside Out Armory 20th Anniversary Exhibition at the Armory Center for the Arts in Pasadena, California, the San Juan Poly Graphic Triennial at the Institute of Culture in Pasadena, California. I'm sorry, at the Puerto Rico Cultural Institute in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Phantom Sightings, Art After the Chicano Movement at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art in Los Angeles, California. And the Whitney Biennial at the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York in 2008. Mario is the co-founder of an artist-run organization located in the harbor area of Los Angeles called Slanguage Studio, which began operation in 2002. It is still active. Mario, it's incredible to have you here. I feel so excited and honored to be introducing you in your talk. And I feel like you're one of these artists who I've always had such deep kind of admiration for in all of the roles that you play as a community organizer, someone who's deeply involved in your immediate sort of community of Wilmington, your role as an educator, which is something that's always been on my radar at Otis and at other institutions that you've taught at, and of course in your art practice, which is incredibly dynamic. So excited to hear you talk. Welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you to the U of O Art Department and MFA program and the Fowlers for having me. I too would like to acknowledge the land that I'm on here in Los Angeles. This is Tongva land. So we also, with all the things that Chris acknowledged about the ancestors of the land, I also too would like to acknowledge the Tongva people here in Los Angeles and the Chumash people. And yeah, I'm here in Los Angeles. I'm here, like Chris says, in Wilmington, which is the port of Los Angeles. I grew up here in this area. I went to Otis College of Art and Design, which is a really kind of old art school here in Los Angeles with a rich tradition. And then I went to UC Irvine, which was one of, at the time in the early 90s, one of the most diverse faculties that there were in the country. And so right now our country is going through like this kind of diversity thing. So I went to school at this crux, this moment where they taught us about all these things. And I went right into my practice the year after, which I graduated my MFA program, which I like to say my MFA stood for motherfucking artist, in 2001. So now it's 20 years ago. And we owe Slanguage Studio, as Chris says, the next year. Again, thank you all for attending. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into my PowerPoint because we don't have a whole long time. And if anybody knows me, I could speak forever. And I'm going to share my screen here and then go directly into my PowerPoint. And then after I have my PowerPoint open, I want to go to full screen, which I don't remember how to do exactly, but I think I will. There you go. All right. Okay, so my lecture is going to have a couple of different points that I'm going to go over, and I'm going to go over like different types of work that I make, and then different types of visual culture that has influenced me. We're in a visual world now, and I think that that's now at this point in history is probably more so communicated by everything we do. Like we're spending a lot of times on screens, we're looking at things all day. In the visual arts, we tend to gravitate to more of the visual applications like the Tumblrs, the Instagrams, and those types of things. And we're looking at images. I think I scroll through images. I don't know how many my phone assesses me every week about how many hours I've spent looking online, but I've looked at a lot. I look at a lot of images a day, and I'm sure that's probably the same for a lot of you. And how do we sift through these images? How do we kind of make these images make sense to us, and what gets kind of garbaged and what gets saved, which gets like screenshotted and put into a folder on your phone or on your laptop or wherever you save things, and which kind of is junk, right? Like how do we decipher these things and types of, in terms of like visual culture? And so visual culture and kind of pop culture is like super important to me in my practice. And I feel like I'm doing research like all the time. My niece, her name is Monica. She's the only person in my family that also went to art school. And she was working with me in the studio a few years ago. And I said, okay, we're going to the mall. We're going to sit in the food court. And I had her sit with me in the food court, and I people watched, right? Like I people watched, and I'm sure you all people watch. And we came back to the studio, and she told the other people there, like, oh, we were in the studios doing research. I mean, at the mall doing research. And I was like, if you do that research thing again, I'm going to break your fingers, because we were doing research. We were watching, observing. And as artists, as we're trained as artists, if you could think back to your first art class, it's all about observing, like observation, either if you're looking at like a still life, or you're looking at a landscape, or you're looking at a figure or whatever. It's about observing. That's like the very first kind of skill set and ideology that art school kind of gives you. But I wanted to talk a little bit about two things in terms of like visual culture. I wanted to talk about these things that are official. Again, like I'm trying to be communicable to you, so I'm going to do like a lot of hand gestures, so just bear with me. Like there's things that are official, like if you think about histories, or you think about your neighborhood, and you're going to go to the park and it has an historic building there, or you're going to the downtown in your area, there's probably a bunch of plaques on things that say this building was made in such and such, or this park was established in such and such, or this monument is to such and such, or on campus there at the university, I'm sure there's a bunch of things that kind of signify an official history. There are these things that are official. And those things are true. Like for a second, what I want us to do is I want us to close our eyes and look up to the sky. And I want you to think about that one cute baby picture or image of you as a toddler or as a little kid, whether it be with Santa Claus, or whether it be with your siblings or your parents, or by yourself. If it's that J.C. Penney's, photograph, or it was a school photograph, but you really, if you close your eyes and in your mind's eye, you could see that image of yourself, that official image of yourself. Like, what image is that? When I close my eyes and think of it, or when I used to close my eyes and think of it, I used to think about, this one photograph. I had these little curly locks, and I was with this, we had a white Samoyed puppy. His name was Zigzag. My father is a kind of old school hippie, marijuano. So like Zigzag, after the Zigzag rolling papers, right? We had a white dog, they're white marijuana rolling papers, Zigzag, makes sense, right? I was there with this dog, I was super cute in front of the house. Like, that's a photograph. Like if I close my eyes and look up in the sky, that's the official, like Mario Ybarra Jr., Mario Ybarra Jr., baby Mario, little Mario photograph that I like to have in my mind's eye. I'm sure you all, like if we were all together, I would go around the room and ask you, what does yours look like? What does yours look like? If you want to drop some maybe in the chat, I don't know if we're activating the chat bit, but tell us, what do those images look like? They're all going to be different, and they're all, I imagine, your official cute baby picture. They're the ones you're going to post on your birthday or whatever. Those are our official pictures, but those things are kind of not always all telling, right? They're kind of broad strokey. They're like, if you think of if you guys are painters, or you know, you think about the big brushes you have in your toolbox, those things are kind of broad strokes, right? They're about filling in big space. They're not about those little tiny details that you kind of have to lick the tip of the paint into, right? Those little fine hair, maybe 10 hairs on a brush, triple odds or whatever they are, to get those fine details, to put the highlight on an eyeball, right? Two different scenarios. You got the broad stroke, and then you got the details. You have a kind of base thing that's based on kind of broad stroking and assumption and all this stuff. And then you got something that's about specificity and about detail and about honing in. And so I had that picture with me and a puppy. But then one day I came home from working at the studio, right? Big noises happen and big things happen. And I'm like fighting off monsters and stuff at the studio, right? I came home, I'm tired. I go open up my laptop. I open up Facebook, and on it, I get a notification that says, Harpo Russell Martinez has tagged you in a photograph. And I'm like, Harpo? Like, who's Harpo? I was thinking Harpo is like, the only thing I know named Harpo is the Oprah Winfrey production company. And I even got excited, right? Like Oprah backwards is Harpo. And I was like, oh, wow, is Oprah trying to get at me? No. I opened it up. I opened up the photograph, and it was this image, this first image that you're seeing here. And I was like, wow, what is this? And I didn't recognize it. I hadn't seen it before. And I see like there's some homies there. It looks like they're dressed in kind of bell bottoms, 1970s style, right? They still got the pressed look, right? That's kind of classic barrio aesthetic, Chicano aesthetic for the time and still today, right? And I'm scanning across, and I see the woman on the far right, and I'm like, wow, like that lady is my mom. Like, that's my mom, right? So I'm like, if that's my mom, the toddler or the baby in her arms is me. And I was like, whoa, right? I couldn't believe that that was like a photograph of me. And I was like, oh my God, what's going on? Right? I was like, oh my God. Say people have they're sending in their chat. Somebody says they were Bud Lightyear. I'm like, what is going on? I don't remember this photograph. Like me, this baby hanging out with all the homies. So immediately I screenshot it or take a picture of it with my phone, and I text it to my mother, and I'm like, Mom, like, what is this picture? What is this picture of me? And she's like, and then you have like a red bandana on my head. Like I like a little gangster baby. And she's like, oh, no. Like, those were me with my friends, and I didn't put that bandana on your head. Harpo did. And if you look at the image, you could easily guess which one is Harpo. He's on the far left with the red bandana on his head too. And she said that when she showed up with me to hang out with her friends, that her homie Harpo got a red bandana, folded it, took it out of his pocket, unfolded it, tied it around my head, and said, this is little man from East Side Wilmas, right? And I was like, whoa. She was like, yeah, he named you little man from East Side Wilmas when you were 2 years old, or not even 2 years old. So yeah, my mother was really young when she had me. She was pregnant with me her senior year in high school and married May of 1973. And I was born in October of 1973. So you could do the math, right? So thinking about like that official picture of me with the puppy, that broad stroke picture, that cute baby picture of me with the puppy in front of my parents' house, to this picture of me like kicking it with the big homies, right? Like, I'm like, wow, like how incredible of a photo. This is something that was totally the opposite of official, which some people will call the unofficial, but I call the orificial. Like the orificial, like the orifice, the thing that opens up and spews, the things that spits, the thing that vomits, that's the orifice. So these are the images of the orifice. They're not the official, the thing that comes to you in your mind's eye, but they're the thing that is about the orifice. They're about the private parts. They're about, not about what you show the public with the broad stroke, but what you find out in a detail. So I hope you all are following that. So this official imagery roaming around and bumps into the orificial imagery, right? We'll go to the next slide. Okay, the next slide. So this is the next slide, and we're talking about visual culture. This is personal visual culture from like my family photo albums. But this image here, if you look at it, there's this huge German Shepherd dog whose name was Snooky. And then my father, my mother, very young father, very young mother, and me as a baby, as an infant, right? I'm in this backyard and with the doggy and a very kind of nuclear family, right? And I was so shocked when I saw this image, and I tell you why. Because all of us have these photo albums, and to tell you, my mother and father were very young when they were married, and they were divorced when I was 5 years old. So they got to, I think my mother said that they were boyfriend and girlfriend from the time she was 15, all throughout high school. They got married once she graduated. She was 18. My father was 21. They were together for 5 years as a married couple. And then they got divorced. And all of us know, and we're all familiar with Photoshop, right? We all know what Photoshop does, Adobe Photoshop. If you get the Adobe suites, you have Photoshop. And now if I was there with you in person, I'd ask you, like, what does Photoshop do? And Photoshop, what it does, it's about manipulating images. It's about cutting things up, changing things up, turning things around, changing the color of things. I'm doing all this stuff with photo manipulation, right? But I'm going to tell you, my mother was not familiar with Photoshop, but what she was familiar with was Photoshop. Because I grew up with the photo album as a kid, that in every photograph where my father had been, my mother had gone with scissors and had chopped my father out of the photograph. So there'd be like images of me as a baby being held in the arm of like a headless man, or there would be a picture of me being held by my mother as a baby, and then some man's shoulder in the corner of the photograph. And those were all my father. That my mother had gotten so upset with my father when they had broken up or gotten in fights or gotten divorced, that she chopped him out of every picture in the photo album. So growing up, I had never really seen a picture of my family unit all together. I'd seen like my father's shoulder, or I'd seen pictures that my father had saved, but I'd never seen like an actual baby picture of me with my mother and father and the dog or anything like that. But I'll tell you how I got this. This photograph came to me by way of my Aunt Christy. She was having a Christmas party at her house, and all the family was there. And my Aunt Christy, like I saw her like coming across the room towards me, and in her hand she had like a black envelope, and she sat next to me and kind of like slyly passed me this black envelope, and I got it, and she said like, put it in your pocket. So like I put it in my pocket real fast. And my wife, Carla, who's super sharp, like she's like eagle eyes, everything. She saw that my aunt had given me this envelope. And soon after my aunt moved away from me, Carla comes up to me. She's like, what did your aunt give you? And I'm like, I don't know. She said not to open it till we leave. You know, I don't think it's cash because it's kind of hard. It might be gift cards. I don't know. And then when we left the party that night, I opened up took out the black envelope and opened it up, and out slid like 10 photographs. And one of them was this one. And I was like, man, like in the official photo albums in the house, you know, my father had been chopped out of the scene, but in this official kind of floating photograph, this was maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, didn't come back to me till 40 years later, like this new image came about, and I had to look at it, and I almost cried because I was telling my mother, like my wife, I'm sorry, like, oh wow, like I did come from love, like thinking about like growing up with my family, they were always fighting, so I was always like, man, like they don't love each other, they hate each other. So to see this image, I'm like, oh man, they loved each other at some point, right? So like that broad stroke understanding that I had, that kind of assumptive understanding that I have, was really blown out the water when I saw that fine point detail in this photograph. Are you following me? So there's like the official, and then on the opposite end of that is the orificial. Okay, I'm gonna move on. Okay, so like, no, that's like my immediate family, right? Like my mom, my dad, little man, Eastside Weedmoss, and East Weedmoss is what we call Wilmington here. Wilmington was named Wilmington after the guy that came out here from, his name was Phineas Banning, and he came out here from Wilmington, Delaware, and he founded the port of Los Angeles, which at this point now is like the 5th largest port in the world. And I believe it's like the 1st largest port in the Americas. So like out here for the past several months, this is where all the container ships have been lined up from China and all these other places so they could come in and get all our other stuff at Target or Walmart or wherever we get stuff. So like, I think it's 60% of the gross national product we consume comes in through the port of Los Angeles and Long Beach. And yeah, so that's the location, but that's the official name, Wilmington. The people here, the barrio here, it's also one of the oldest barrios in Los Angeles, Mexican-American barrio. And so much so that I just finished reading this book the other day, Mexican Americans in Wilmington. But we don't call it Wilmington, we call it Wilmas. So the beginning of Wilmington, W-I-L, but mas, like more, Wilmas, right? If you want to say it, go ahead and say it, Wilmas. When we were in middle school, like our PE teacher used to, on the jumping jacks on 10, we'd have to scream out, Wilmas, like all the kids would be like, 9, 10, Wilmas. And then he would make us scream out like we were doing push-ups, be like, I'm a man, I'm a man, I'm a Wilmas man, right? Like old school, they don't do that anymore. But yeah, it's like, has this tradition. But the same thing, and I imagine in your families, you might have somebody who's like designated themselves the family historian, right? Like, oh man, if I was there with you, I'm sure a couple of you would be raising your hand and laughing, because there's always somebody in the family that is like, okay, we need to gather all this stuff, we need to do that, we need to do this, and takes on like a kind of bossy role and becomes like the family historian, does the tree and researches all the stuff, and when a funeral happens, knows who everybody is and all this kind of stuff. In my family, I have a cousin who lives up in Santa Barbara, and her name is Elvira. And so I have like a Harpo and an Elvira in my life. And I one day again, I come from working in the studio, I'm working all hard at the studio, how hard we work as artists, as motherfucking artists. I come home, I open up my laptop, and again, a notification on Facebook. Elvira has tagged you in a photograph. I'm like, oh my God, what did she send me? I have no clue. So I open up the photograph, and it's this image. And I'm like, wow, I've never seen this image. It's like super old looking, like who are these people? I have no clue. And as I start scanning it, I'm like looking at all these men and women, and I look down to the bottom right-hand corner and to the youngest woman on the photograph, and I recognize her as my abuela, as my grandmother Soledad. And I'm like, oh my God, that's my abuela. That's my grandmother Soledad as a teenager. And I'm like, oh my God, my abuela as a teenager, she was so pretty. And, growing up, I just think of her as abuela. I don't think of her as a young teenager with, lipstick and, looking cute and stuff. I just think of her as my abuela. And I'm sure a lot of us might have that too. And I'm like, oh man, so this is her sibling. So she had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 other siblings. And in the middle there is my great grandfather, Juan, and his wife to his side with the white hair, Soledad. So my grandmother Soledad was a junior also. I'm Mario Ybarra Jr. She was Soledad Jr. And I was like, oh man, that's cool. And that's my great grandpa. And like, look at his mustache. And at the time when I first saw it and I saw his mustache, I was like, oh man, that's cool. That means there will be hope for my mustache one day, you know, that I'll be able to do the long twirly thing. And I was looking at it, and it reminded me of, you know, for the most part, you know, I was thinking about her immigration story because I know she came to the United States from the state of Jalisco, the state of Jalisco, Mexico, when she was a teenager. And I was like, oh man, like she was just a teenager. She must have not been too much older than this when she migrated to the United States. And I started giggling because I remembered in 2006, I was part of an exhibition at the Sculpture Center in New York. And if y'all are not familiar with the Sculpture Center, it's an interesting place, really cool place, shows art, you know, and the curators there had invited me to show a billboard project I'd done. They had put it in the courtyard there, but they also said that they were going to be making a catalog, and that the catalog could be whatever we wanted. Like our contribution to the catalog could be whatever we wanted. Because if you think of a catalog normally, like if you're going to be ordering something, you would expect the goods in the catalog to be the thing that you received, right, or ordered. But in this book, they were saying, no, we don't really care if the work in the show is in the catalog. And so that was, they're like, send us a proposal of whatever you want to do. And I was like, oh, wow. And at this point, my grandmother, my abuela, was getting older, and she's the storyteller, you know, and I remember just growing up around her and hearing all her stories. And my father is also a storyteller. I guess that's kind of where I get it from too. You know, from that, I'm like my grandma, my dad, me, we're like kind of like the storytellers in the family. And I was like, oh, let's go interview my grandmother and ask her about her migration story and ask her about what was going on. And this is where that broad stroke brush, the assumption brush comes into play. And, you know, I went, and my wife and I, we went to my grandmother's house and we went into her garden. We were sitting on her little garden table, and I brought out the recorder. And, you know, I thought, oh yeah, like I know all these answers to the questions. I'm going to ask them, but I think I know them. Like I'm assuming that I know them and I know everything. Not true. I was assuming. I had that big general brush out, right? So we get to my grandmother's house, put the recorder down, and my first question is kind of an obvious one. I'm like, oh, grandma, like, why did you come to the United States? And in an assumptive move, I'm like, you know, if we were playing a Family Feud here, top 5 answers on the board, you know, I'm sure we would ping like ding, 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 if one of us said for a better life. Like that's drilled into our heads. Like any immigration story, any migration story, when they ask the person, or when the person talks about their parents or whatever, leaving their country, coming to this country, it's always for a better life, right? Like there's even films called A Better Life, right? Like A Better Life, the US is a better life, and, you know, the American dream and all of that kind of stuff, right? So that's kind of what we've been, you know, that's a kind of big general assumption brush. Like that's the top answer. There are other things, of course, but that's kind of like the assumed answer for everybody, that they came and migrated to the US for a better life. So when I put the tape deck down, I'm like, oh, grandma, what do you come? And I totally guilty of mansplaining. And I'm like, for a better life? And she said, no, like, get better life. I came here for revenge. Right? Like, I'm gonna put these glasses on because these tell the story better, right? She's like, I came here for revenge. And Carla and I are like, like we slide our chairs back from the table, right? And we're like staring at her with our like big bug eyes, and we're like, revenge? Oh my God, revenge? I'm like, what was the story? And she says, well, when I was a girl back in Mexico, she had a boyfriend that was in the army, and you know, every day she wore black, and she you know, she wore black. I don't know, this is all they have close to kind of giving you a kind of prop here, this kind of black bag, but she wore black every day, and she went to the church, and she lit candles for her boyfriend and would say prayers for her boyfriend, that he would come back from being in the army safe. She said that one day she went to the plaza, right? She walked into the plaza and she saw her girlfriends there. and her name was Soledad, which means solitude or loneliness. She went to the plaza and she saw a couple of her girlfriends there, and they called her Chumina. That was her nickname. They're like, oh, Chumina, like, how are you? Have you seen your boyfriend? And she's like, you know, with her black veil, of course I haven't seen him. I just came from the church to pray for him. And they're like, oh, well, we've seen him. And she was like, what? Right? What? You've seen him? And they were like, yes, we seen him yesterday here in the plaza. And he told us that we asked him, had he seen you? And he replied, oh, she's been waiting this long. She could wait a few more days. Wait a few more days, like, right? Oh, she got heated. And she went home and she was like, you know, revenge, right? And little did that man know, the guy that was in the army know, that my grandfather, whose name is Salvador, or Savior, Soledad and Savior, there's a total telenovela here somewhere, was every night when she was at home and playing sad, he was throwing little pebbles at her window and telling her jokes and telling her stories. And he was a couple of years younger than her. And a week later, they eloped. My grandfather and my grandmother, they eloped and fled. It came to the United States. And my grandmother came here for revenge against that boy that told her girlfriends that she could wait a little bit longer. And I was like, what? That blew my mind. Like, my grandma was a gangster, dude. Like, not only was she cute, she was a G. And I was like, oh man, like, oh, grandma, so you didn't come here for a better life? You came here for revenge. I did it for revenge. And me and Carla were like looking at her and her a whole new light, a whole new understanding of my grandmother, of my abuela, came to light. And we were like, whoa, she's a G. She's an awesome lady. She came here and like ran away from her home and eloped with my grandfather because that boy was trying to put her off. Oh man, so she came here for revenge. Like, that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. That assumptive, big general brush going up against that detail brush, that fine brush, those finer points in life, those finer points within culture, those finer points within our visualization through something like a photograph like this, and stories. Okay, I'll go to the next slide, which, hold on one second. Carla, sorry, I have to come back. I don't know how to go to the next slide. Something happened. But yeah, so revenge, right? This is my wife, Carla, and she's gonna help me get to the next slide, which I don't know what happened. Or is it down?
Did you do the other one? How were you going scrolling down?
Oh, doing that. But anyway, so if you guys could get that point of the officialness of something that you think about, right? Like the officialness that you think about something that is kind of burnt into your mind's eye, and then something that comes up abruptly and then shows you the orifice, the thing that spits on you, the thing that is, I was talking with Chris earlier, that kind of ooze, that slime that comes out of the holes, right? And that hits you by surprise. Okay, so thank you. This was my grandmother before she passed away. This is my grandmother, Soledad Ybarra. So like in my mind's eye, you know, this is how I would imagine her, but she was still tough. Like she had that Cruella de Vil kind of hairdo. That new movie is coming out about Cruella, and I've been thinking about her because I keep seeing the spots with the Cruella hair, and I'm like, my grandma like rocked that hairdo. Yeah. So, you know, just before I go into my artwork, I wanted to kind of explain that to you, like this idea of kind of broad stroke and fine point. And I'm going to go into a couple projects. We got about a half hour left or so. So I'm going to tell you when my grandmother would ask me about my work, or my living grandmother on my mother's side would ask me about my work, I always talk about three themes that artists have been dealing with for millennium, right? Like if I hold my phone this way and take a picture of you, or like the way this photograph of my grandmother photo is oriented, it's a portrait photograph, right? Artists have been dealing with portraiture since forever. If I turn my camera this way, it's a landscape photograph. Artists have been dealing with landscape forever. And if I turn my camera this way so the camera's facing me, it's selfie, right? It's a selfie. It's self-portraiture. So 3 ways to easily talk about work and within like a rubric that artists have always been dealing with throughout art history is kind of portraiture, landscape, and self-reflection or self-portraits. There's also still lifes, but I don't really get into still lifes. I want to though, that's next. So yeah, portraiture, landscape, self-portraiture. So if I'm thinking about portraiture, this is a piece that I did it was in the Whitney Biennial in 2008, and it's called the Scarface Museum. For all I know, he had my friend Angel killed. The Scarface Museum, for all I know, he had my friend Angel killed. The story is that one day, I was in school. I grew up with these boys here on my block. I grew up with about 7 boys. 4 of them had to go to serve long-term federal or state prison sentences for different things they did. I always say that they went to certain institutions and I went to art school. I went to art institutions. And when I came home from graduate school, I had to kind of deep dive back into the neighborhood because even though I hadn't left my childhood home, I was still living at home with my family. I was so involved in school, like I hadn't really had a chance to check in with the folks around me. So I went to go visit my friend Angel, and at his home, in his house with talking about family photos, instead of having family photos or anything like that, he had all these Scarface memorabilia everywhere. Like he had photos of 8x10 glossy signed by Al Pacino, and he had statues, and he had all this stuff dedicated to Scarface. And I was like, yo, like you got all this stuff in your house, like doesn't your wife get upset with you? He's like, no, she not saying nothing. A couple of weeks later, a few months later, I'm like driving down my street early one morning to come get my mail at my mom's house, because by that time I had moved out, and I was coming to get my mail like 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm an early bird. And I'm driving past my friend Angel's house. And as I'm passing it, there's like 10 FBI and ATF agents kind of walking to his front door, right? And I'm like driving by the street and I'm like, right? Like, I'm like, what the fuck? Like fucking X-Files is going into Angel's house. And on our street were like all these SUVs and stuff. And they ended up raiding his house. And I came to my house, I grabbed my mail, I jumped back in my car. And by the time I made it back, passing back his house, the FBI agents were putting him into the back seat of the Suburban. And I was passing, and he and I made eye contact, right? Like, like if you grew up with somebody or your sibling or whatever, like you don't have to be talking too much. You can make eye contact and like thousands of words are communicated. And he and I had that type of relationship, and I was like, whoa, like this is heavy. I went straight to his mother's house and like knocking the door 6 o'clock in the morning, like, senora, having to tell her what's going on. And the next day, all of his Scarface memorabilia was all in the trash. His wife was like, nope, you can't have this no more. So I asked her if I could rescue it, and he went to prison, and he and I were communicating and back and forth. And I would ask him questions about Scarface, like, why did you collect all that stuff? And he was like, well, that was the only kind of Latino hero or representation I saw that achieved back to like that for a better life, American dream sentiment in media. And like, since he had seen that, he really tried to mimic that, and he himself got in trouble with drugs. So yeah, man. So I decided that I was going to kind of make this museum piece that I consider a portrait of my friend Angel. And they're made works, like on the back wall there are all these limited edition prints that I made from kind of key scenes from it. There's kind of sport memorabilia that I used for performances, et cetera, et cetera. And the piece is called For All I Know, He Had My Friend Angel Killed, because in the film, there's a character that gets killed that is named Angel, and my friend's name is Angel. And Scarface didn't literally kill my friend Angel, but he did send him away for a good decade of his life to prison because he was trying to emulate this anti-hero. And I was kind of questioning that, like, why is it that the only kind of Latino representation that we have within media is negative stereotypes, right? And anyway, that's the Scarface Museum. So it's a portrait. Make sense? Portrait. And then that was in 2008, and kind of going back and forth in time. This is a project. There was a woman named Annie Shaw who used to have a little barbershop. She rented it and started doing art projects out of this little barbershop in Chinatown. And she had a competition to see who would take over this barbershop. And my wife and I, with Slanguage, we won kind of the lease to this barbershop. And we kind of left it as a barbershop, and we would have art exhibitions and different things there. And we never cut hair. I don't know why we never cut hair, but it still had the remnants of a barbershop. It had a chair in there, it had the mirrors, but we would show art. And I was asked by a curator at the Tate Modern to do a project there in 2007. So I was like, well, we could recreate my barbershop, but I want to have it as a working barbershop inside the Tate. So this is, and it was also, the project was also supposed to be somehow touching on theater, like the art of theater. And I wanted to kind of touch on the notion of Sweeney Todd, the barber, the barber that kills the people, and him and his wife eat the pies and all this kind of meat pies and all this stuff. So this is called the Sweeney Tate. This installation is based on the barbershop that my wife and I had in Chinatown, but it's an installation at the Tate Modern. But we actually cut hair. I actually invited 3 barbers, a barber from Milano, Italy, a barber from London, England, and I brought my hometown barber, Victor Garcia, from Wilmington there to the museum. And they took the barbers that were kind of local, took their appointments there in the shop. And I don't have a photo of that, but yeah, they were we used it as a working barbershop inside the Tate Modern. And so this is the installation, the Sweeney Tate installation. So that's about landscape, in my opinion. Like, they're about things that I kind of look at in the landscape, like things I would see in the neighborhood and be like, how do you, but they're things that are also in my life, right? Like Angel is in my life, the barbershop is in my life. Like, how do you start like bringing these things from your life and kind of weaving in the narrative, these official points or the oral official points, and how do you weave them into your practice? My practice is very personal, and it comes from like my experience, but I try to weave it into the fantastic. I try to do that as best I can. Maybe because I'm from Los Angeles, maybe there's like some Hollywood instinct in me or some Disneyland instinct in me. But yeah, man, my work is kind of seems to have that, it's about kind of creating space and occupying space, but also very much delves into like a space of narrative, but in relationship to like portraiture and landscape that's there, right? I'm gonna skip through these because our time is kind of getting short, but that's just another kind of portrait thing about this graffiti crew I started. But I wanted to get to that final point where I was talking about, portrait, Scarface Museum, landscape, something like the barbershop, where I'm kind of pulling out from a cityscape or pulling out from like the world and transforming it into installations, either workable or things you just look at. And then this project was called Universal Monsters, which was a show I had at the gallery I used to work with here in Los Angeles named Arnold Fraser Gallery. And my proposal was, I was like, okay, I've been doing these things that are about portraiture. I've been doing these things that are about landscape, and like my best way of interpreting those things. I was like, how about self-portraiture? Like, what about me? Like what are the things that I reflect on? And so what I did is I did this show called Universal Monsters. Again, film is like super important, right? Like this notion of kind of cinema, the Scarface, the barbershop with theater, like this kind of performative scenarios are also super important in my work. And Universal Monsters, I did this series of works where I kind of interpreted all of the famous universal monsters. Like, this is the Invisible Man. And this is a diptych. They're two paintings. And back to like the performative and kind of relating things back to myself is that every day I would go into my studio and I would like, what can I do here? Like, what do I have here to turn into something? Like, you know, like I pulled out these sunglasses. Carla let me borrow her middle finger sunglasses. Or like, you know, earlier I asked her if I could borrow her these sunglasses, right? Like I pull out something that's some kind of performative prop, and I'm like, just to break the ice in the studio, I got to get something done. And so that day I walked in the studio, and on a counter was this ski mask and my hat that I lost. I really love that hat. I wish I had it back. It was like nice. It would have been perfect for this weather. And my glasses, you know, I put on my glasses and I'm like, boom, the Invisible Man. But it was like back to my childhood, back to relating to my mother, my lived experiences, that my mother was a working mom. You know, I told you that she had got divorced when I was 5, and I forget what grade it was. It was an elementary school, and it was Halloween, and I forgot to tell her that I needed a costume. And in elementary school, like, I don't know if they do that where y'all come from, but we used to walk a parade, like on the track, all the kids walk around in their costumes, and they play like the Monster Mash, you know, the kids walk around with their little costumes, the Monster Mash. They did the Monster Mash, right? And we would like stroll around, and like kids would get prizes. And so that morning I was like, Mom, knocking on the door, like, Mom, like, I need a costume. And she's like, Cabron, like, why didn't you tell me? Like, I could have got you something yesterday, or we could have figured it out yesterday. I was like, I forgot. But I see all the kids, like, I live across the street. I still live in my childhood home. I see the kids walking. I'm like, man, I need a costume. She's like, okay, go grab me this and grab me that. Go get the ace bandage and go grab my sports coat. Like, she made me grab all this stuff from around the house. And I came back to her room, and she put the sports coat on me, and she got the ace bandage, like, you know, I have this roll of toga. She got the ace bandage and like wrapped it around my head, you know, like I had like ace bandage all around my head. And she put her sunglasses on me, put a hat on me, and I was like, oh shit. Like, she put gloves on me. I'm like, what am I? And she was like, you're the Invisible Man. And like the whole world was like, oh, Invisible Man. Like, I was like, yeah, like, I'm the Invisible Man. Like, that would be like a awesome and superpower to have, to be able to turn invisible. Imagine what kind of mischief I could get into invisible. And I remember walking to school and going to my classroom, and it like it's hot here in October. In Los Angeles, it's hot. Like right now, we have this like pre-summer heat wave. The Santa Ana winds are blowing through here right now, so it's hot. At June, we call it June gloom. It kind of gets a little bit sprinkly, kind of spring vibes. But then in the summer and into the fall, it's hot here. I don't think if we get, especially with global warming, I don't think we have like a really like windbreakers hoodie day until, I don't know, January, February or something like that. But in October, it's warm. And I'm like this kid all with ace bandage and gloves on. And I'm like walking the track, like the Monster Mash. I did the Monster Mash. And I'm like, I'm invisible, motherfuckers. Like, yeah, none of y'all could see me. You can't see me, right? And I'm invisible. So like this piece, the Invisible Man, is kind of like an ode to like my mom's making me invisible. But then like art historians got a hold of it, and they started, you know, turning it into like an identity politic. And yeah, I guess that was kind of there, and they associated it with kind of Black literature, of course, the Invisible Man, right? And but I was like, and then they brought it to like where Latino males in the US could be equated to being invisible, you know, and like they took it a whole other direction. And I was fine with that. I'm glad my art could have like multiple interpretations, and I get to learn from it. Like I make it for a certain intentionality, but man, like, you know, people could come and really, historians, that's their jobs to like open it up. And I was like, man, curators too, you know, and I'm like, man, that's great. And so that's the one with the, you know, with the ski mask on. And then another day I came home I mean, I went to my studio, I took my hat off. I always go to the studio and I put my hat and my glasses and stuff on the counter at the studio or my work table. And I looked at it and it was this weird shape, kind of, French bread looking shape of my hat with the glasses on it. And I'm like, yo, that's the Invisible Man too. Like the baklava and the hat and that, it kind of takes away my identity. But this is like another version of the Invisible Man. And so I made this painting based on that photograph. So like the selfie I took, in my studio in the morning, and then this photograph of the hat I took the same time. Then we turned them into paintings, and they became a diptych. And you could see them installed here. Like on the far wall there is the one, and then on this other wall you can't see is the opposite end of it. There you could see it there. And there was like the Creature of the Black Lagoon, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Like there are a few different ones. These bright neon ones are called Hangry, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, because I'm type 2 diabetic, and when my blood sugar drops, I start getting cranky, hangry. And one of them is up right now at the DePaul Museum of Art in Chicago at the DePaul University. And the other one is in the LACMA Permanent Collection. Another landscape, this is like a cow visiting a butcher shop. I'm going down the block. I had like the barber shop, I had butcher shop. Right now I'm working on a pizzeria. And this was a music video set. So like, do you follow me? Like these kind of notions of like how things can evolve, things from like our daily life. And like my intent would be that a person would see these things, then go back into their world and could imagine into their world something that could be, out of this world. Music video set. This showed in Spain, and it was originally made for Spain, where they love a lot of meat. But it was my critique of the art fairs, because the first time I had ever gone to an art fair was the big art fair in Miami. It was in 2006. And when I came home, all my artist friends were like, oh, what was a fair like? Now kind of everybody knows what they're like, but then people were still kind of curious. And it was really shocking because I saw these artists again with that moment on them that were like super important and I revered greatly, like kind of on their works on display and for sale. And I was jokingly tell my friends, oh man, it was like a cow visiting a butcher shop. Like you see your father's, leg over there and your other family's tongue over there. And that's how I felt when I first went to see an art fair. Like I was like, all these works that I have an artist that I have such reverence for are being just like chopped up and for sale. Past that. Okay. Well, damn, talk a lot. But I'm gonna have to check y'all, see where I'm at. Okay, so I'm going to tell you about my longest working project. This is the last thing I'll tell you about. So in 2002, 2001, I got out of graduate school, and you guys I'm assuming are still in school there, and you have all these access. Well, I don't know, this year with COVID, it kind of cut off a lot of our access to things. But when you're in school, typically you have a lot of access to space and to tools and materials. And when we were getting out of school, when myself and my friend Juan and my wife Carla were going to be getting out of school, we didn't have that resource anymore. So we were working at this place, and we made a little plan on a sheet of cardboard that, okay, we're going to rent a space, and we're going to turn this space into where we work, and this space into where we could display art. And we had this big old plan. So we rented a space in the neighborhood I grew up in, because my big homie, the guy that I made the Scarface Museum about, owned this building. And we were able to rent this room from him for real cheap. And so we got this room and these 2 rooms, and it was an old bakery, and it was a mess, and it was fun. We'd have all kinds of events and different things there. Like I remember the first time we had a barbecue. HR from the band Bad Brains that DC hardcore band, like sang for us, and we used to have a blast there. And but eventually all the kids from the neighborhood, like all the young artists, teenagers and young adults, like came and took over the spot. Like I'd be in there trying to work and they would be knocking on the door like, Mario, what are you doing? And I'm like, oh, I'm trying to make art. And they're like, we want to make art too. I let them in and be like, okay, you go to that corner and make something over there. You go to this corner and you make something over there. And eventually they kind of took over, and I was just kind of the facilitator of the space. Like I make sure it was open. They would show up and make stuff. And I'm super blessed and lucky that I have teachers and people in my life that are always sending folks over to visit me. And they would come in, and people, curators would come and be like, oh, is this your work? And I'd be like, oh no, this is Pearl, this graffiti artist girl. She goes and paints graffiti, and she takes photographs of the kind of freeway spaces, and those are her photographs for, you know, like that. And then the people, the curators would be all confused because they're like, oh, we came to your studio. We were expecting to see your art. And you're showing us all these young people's art. Like, what is this? Like, what is your art? And I would have to reply to them, you're breathing in it. You're breathing in it. You're breathing in my art. You're breathing in the space I facilitate. You're breathing in like the space that I'm creating for folks to kind of come and make things in. And through the years, that was now starting 20 years ago. And through the years, we've had a Slanguage Teen Arts Council. We've had a young women's collective. We also train like the artists that want to teach how to facilitate workshops for children and teenagers. And we kind of assist them in building their first curriculums out of school. And now like they've gone on to some of the younger kids, some of the first artist generation that worked with us, they've gone on to go to school and do other things. So much so that this right now, the other day, our first Slanguage Studio teen, who was a teenager and then became was mentored by one of our other artists, Arnaldo Vargas, at the high school, because Arnaldo became the high school teacher. And then Arnaldo sent him to me when I was teaching at UCLA, and I taught new genres at UCLA. Armando Cortez, he was a Slanguage kid, went to the high school here, was Arnaldo's student, became my student at UCLA. And just the other day, he graduated with his Master's of Fine Arts degree in the Yale sculpture program. So this is like, we've come a long way, and a lot of the young people that work with us go on to do a lot of different things. Like they become, you know, they go on to live their lives now. Like some of them are, you know, their parents, they do a lot of different things in the community. They, you know, they all don't all go on to be artists or go get their MFAs, but they go do things, you know. They even saw like this little kid with that's holding the green frame, and then on the bottom picture he has a little hat on. That's Theo Veliz. Like that kid is just finishing up his second year at UC Santa Cruz, and it is like on a trajectory to be a filmmaker. So it's kind of interesting now to see all these, and I see one of these other kids here, he just became a father. And yeah, so like it's interesting to see how, you know, people that you work with grow. This was a Teen Arts Council here. This was that girl Pearl I was telling you about. This young woman, this was her, she was a graffiti artist. This is her first exhibition at the Museum of Latin American Art. And now she's gone on to have her master's degree in social work, and she helps homeless veterans now. And she's amazing. She's also a kind of urban historian. We've gone on to do things at museums. And you know, this is an interesting picture because all these kids are the Dub City breaking dancing crew. And my wife, Carla, who's here in the middle, she invited them to use our backspace because they were breakdancing on the street, and the cops were citing them for loitering. So my wife was like, you can come in here and breakdance. And this man all the way to the left. So we have the Dub City Breakers, me here when I was a little bit more heavy set. And then the guy here all the way to the left is Gunnar Kavnar, who just retired from being the executive director at the Astrup Fearnley Museum, which is the largest collector of contemporary American art in the world, outside of the US, and he's in Oslo, Norway. So we had like, you know, we're like to what we call kind of train crash, like we bring the Dub City kids, Dub City tribe together with somebody like Gunnar. And then finally, this is my last slide. This is from LACMA a few years ago. This was a big centerfold photograph in Vanity Fair magazine. And this is, you know, contemporary art, a kind of survey of contemporary artists in Los Angeles now. So if you could think back to that first slide, it's like baby Mario, little man with all the big homies. Here you could see me, I'm wearing a hat and my wife is wearing like a red dress. Is Mario and Carla with all the big homies. You know, you have John Baldessari, Frank Gehry, she's all the heavyweights, man, all in the front row here. And my generation, we're standing in Bradford there, and you have the Osco group, Sam Durant. It's just amazing. And these are all artists that have work in have been recent acquisitions into the LACMA permanent collection. There's Ed Moses there in the wheelchair, rest in peace. John Baldessari, rest in peace. So it's kind of interesting to kind of come full circle in terms of like these official broad stroke things and like the specificity, right? That fine brush orifice thing, the thing that spews. And, you know, if you're looking at this photograph, it was in the issue of Vanity Fair. It was like this, you know, centerfold, and to be able to be included in this group is pretty amazing for me. It's like, I would have never thought myself to be there, but you know, the work gets you places. So think of that. I don't know if we have any questions or if we have any time left for questions. We're just at an hour.
Yeah, I think we do. Thanks so much, Mario. Yeah, I think Wendy had posted in the chat there if anyone has questions to post them in the Q&A section. And Mario, we have definitely some time for answering questions. And I guess, Mario, I thought maybe I could ask a question. Just thanks so much for the talk. It's incredible to hear you talk about your practice, and the broad stroke, fine point way that you're describing things is so, yeah, right. It's incredible because it's so illustrative of how you're telling a story of like a deeper awareness of your origin story. In some ways, like through your talk, it kind of shows how it opens up into this broader understanding of oneself in a community and part of the art world. And this is kind of it's almost like you see the scalability or something of life as an artist. And one of the things I was thinking about, especially in sort of thinking about this year and the importance of like being together and being social, and how that's such a part of your practice and Slanguage, is how maybe you could speak this if it's interesting to you. This idea of you know, an artist working towards like an exhibition versus how we nourish ourselves every day, like in a day-to-day basis as artists. You talked a little bit about this idea of like research, which I really appreciate that. And I'm curious to hear you talk more about like your experience of the day-to-day versus, you know, the big picture scope of the scope of being an artist. Yeah, that'd be particularly interesting for our students to hear about.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Chris. Yeah, the day-to-day is it comes like, what is that? I was reading the other day where like culture comes from habit. Like culture is built up from habits. And oh man, I got a bunch of habits, both good and bad. Both good and bad, right? And it's about kind of trying to like stay consistent in your habits. And that's like being accepting of oneself and their habits. Like, for example, like I'm an installation artist. I like putting things together, and that means things. That it doesn't mean just ideas. Like I can show you this corner right here, and it's like full of stuff. Carla calls it my little hoarder corner of the kitchen, because I'm always like picking up things, and that could be from like, I have no reason. I have no, like, this is just an example. I got this box the other day at the thrift store. I don't know if you can see it, but you know how many boxes I have? Like, there's nothing in them. Like, there's nothing in the box. It's just an empty box. But I'm trying not to like suppress the urge that when I see this box, like it has to come with me. Like, you know what I mean? Like, because if I suppress that urge, like if I suppress those like habit urges, I'll be thinking that I'll leave the box like I found this at a thrift store. If I were to have left this box at a thrift store for like the $4 or whatever I paid for it, I would fucking be thinking about this box for like a month. Like that box at the thrift store, the box at the thrift store. Like I should have got that damn box in the thrift store. It's like so pretty. Like I should have got that box in the thrift store. But then I'm like, what happens is like a kind of dots connect. Like because I didn't like suppress the urge to get this cracked box, right? Like, and I'll show you how a dot connects, because I don't know, another like a month or so ago, somebody sent me a box of chocolates. And this like is the gold wrapped paper for the box of chocolates, right? So I get this box and I'm like, oh, that's why I saved this wrapping paper. Like I'm gonna cut it and I'm gonna line the box with this paper. Like something as simple as that, like something as simple as that, like not suppressing the urge, like even though you don't know what the answer is at the end of the day, like this is like a small picture thing, right? Like me cutting, I'm gonna get my scissors, I'm gonna get my cutting board, I'm gonna cut out the sheet of paper, I'm gonna measure it, I'm gonna take out the inserts from the box, I'm gonna put it all back together nice and cute. And like that kind of making is just as important and valuable as like the big picture, like, oh, I'm gonna have a show thing. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I guess that's kind of what you're saying, like that macro micro relationship to like how you, and then that develops your habit, which then turns into culture. Because I don't question that no more. Like, oh, the shit I do ain't culture. Like, homie, I'm culture. Like, I'm culture now. Like, I like whatever I do. Fuck it. When I die, it's because it's gonna go into the archive of somewhere, something. Somebody's gonna come and be like, why the fuck did Mario have like all these boxes? Like, why did he collect all these like sheets of chocolate paper? And then they'll find out one that I finished and be like, oh, okay, like that's why Mario did that. Like I don't know why. Like, okay, like something else I got yesterday was this funny rubber toy I got at the other thrift store I went to, right? And like now, like since my keen of looking, my sensibility from practicing it every day is so honed. And the best way I could explain a sensibility is like with your clothes. Like I'm imagining all of us have a whole closet full of clothes. And what is it, like an 80-20 rule or something like that? We only really wear 20% of the things we have our go-tos. And why don't you wear that one sports coat that you bought that you had to wear to like a dinner or something? Because it's not your go-to. It's like you didn't like it. It wasn't comfortable. And I bet you if you go find that sport coat, there's still like, there might even be money in the pocket, but you just didn't like it. So you don't even want to go back to it, right? And but there's those sweatshirts that we love, and even if they have a hole in it, we want to fix it and stuff like that. And that's how we develop our sensibility. Not so much so that we just love that sweater, but it's also because we know because we tried on the other stuff that we don't like that shit, right? Like, so like once you kind of hone that sensibility for yourself and you're not afraid of it, you're not trying to suppress it, you're not letting all the little inner voices like shut it down. Like when I saw this in the little antique store I went to with Carla, like this is the first thing that went in my basket. I was like, and I pulled around and went around, and I was like, she looked in my basket and she just like, yep, that's, and Carly even has a saying for me, my wife. She's like, out of all the things in this store, like out of all the nice things in this flea market or this museum or wherever we're going, of course you like that. Like, of course, that's your thing and you want to sit there in front of it for a while or watch the whole video or whatever. And it's because I've seen so much stuff. I know now what my sensibility is. On the contrary to that, doesn't mean that I'm not open-minded, because there might be some new stuff, like new music or something that like the kids in the studio, they'll play me new music. And I'm not like a curmudgeon, like, yeah, no, I don't want that. Like 90s hip hop only. Get out of here. Like, I'm not like that. Like, I don't shake my cane at them. Like, I listen to it. It's like, I'm like, all right, like I get a sense of it. Like that one song was cool. The rest is whatever, like, and like I watch their Tiny Desks concerts, you know what I mean, to see them.
Yeah.
And I'll Google them and just to see like what's up. And some things get added to their rotations, get picked up and put on my shell, like how the little hermit crabs put things on their shells. Like, but that stuff builds up. And that's what, if you don't have that, if you're not in that practice, that's why they call it a practice. If you're not in that practice, you're not building up the habits that turn into culture.
Thank you for that amazing answer. Hey, Mario, Catherine Sullivan is here and has a question, which is, do elements from one installation get reused in another?
That's a good question. And I'm just starting to come to that like arena, because now I've done several like larger scales in installations, and the kind of romantic idea that they're all going to be put into like a institutional collection or something like that, hasn't all come to fruition. So yes, like now with the butcher shop thing, before COVID hit, I was starting to reinstall that in my studio, my current studio, because I wanted it to be the set of a podcast. So like it was an installation in Madrid for whatever it was, and it traveled around a couple of places as that installation. But now I'm kind of making a version of it with some of the same, componential parts in my studio, but with a different intent to be like a set. And I want my podcast to be called Chop It Up. And since COVID happened, like, and we're all kind of at home or wherever we are, I haven't been going to the studio. And then I didn't tell you guys, but in December, I got sick and I was in the hospital and I contracted COVID, and I was in the hospital and I had to get an operation on my leg, and that was just a mess. And I'm still recuperating from that. So I haven't been able to go back to my studio. But my plan is when I go back to turn it into like a new set with a new intention. And so yeah, they are starting to do that. And I think music has helped me best with that, Chris, because as I've listened to music, you always hear covers and you always hear different artists doing versions of songs, or like the same artist doing different versions of their songs, like the live version as opposed to the a cappella version and all that. And if I were to be giving a new lecture, like the top of my notes is versions, like versions, like how an artist, a visual artist, can free themselves to create versions. Like you don't always have to be doing the one-offs all the time.
Thank you, Mario. I think we have time for one last question, and it's a question from a student asking about the experience of accessing memories and how challenging sometimes that can be. It's another practice question in a way, which I feel like you touched on at a couple of different points during the talk. But I think the question is something along the lines here. I'm going to summarize. What would you recommend for how to find these memories? How do you confront deepest memories? How do they change as we get older, et cetera? A broad question, but something about this idea of kind of confronting memory within the context maybe of a creative practice, or maybe just as a person.
Well, as a person, if you have like, I have a lot of traumatic memories, of course, pretty sure a lot of us do. And if you have something that's really irking you, make sure you see a therapist. And I'm sure the university has therapists that you could visit. So make sure that that's okay, like you're okay on that end. And for students especially, know that you have resources to do that. But as an artist, I think being like this idea I was talking about earlier of narrative and storytelling, I guess in relationship to like authenticity, like, when you're telling a story or somebody's telling a story and it's not authentic, or they're just kind of making it up. We read it real fast, like, oh, they're BSing us, or they didn't really do that, or that's a made up story. And I think that if you think about like how you tell stories, and if you listen to storytellers, like if you listen, I like to listen to like stand-up comedians or I'll listen to This American Life or something because I like power load stories, right? Like watch a lot of films. If you find good storytellers, like that would be your homework. If you're around, or if you're even in the coffee shop and you're eavesdropping on the table next to you and you hear a really good story and that person's really into the story, I want you to turn on like your internal recording device and think about like, oh man, like what is making this a good story? Is it their enthusiasm? Is it the vocabulary? Is it the scenarios they paint? Is like the pictures they bring to us? Did they develop a character in a good way or an interesting way? You know, all those kind of things are like, so if you think of those things like, oh, that makes a good story, and then you're like, start thinking about yourself, in my life can be like a good story, or how can I start the approach of telling a good story from my experience? And it takes practice. Like, so like telling a story, like I was the smallest boy up there. I grew up with 7 kids on my block, like from different families, intermixed from all the different families. And I was like the youngest one of the kids like that we hung out with. And all of them were really good storytellers. Actually, we used our first game that I remember playing with them as a little boy was Make Me Laugh. So we would like all sit in a row and each person would have a turn where you stand up and you'd have to like do some kind of comedy thing to make the other kids laugh. And the first person that would laugh, they were it. And so I would like listen to their stories and listen to their things all the time. But if you hear somebody, the other thing that might be really important in it is that there's some, even if they're BSing you, there's a sense of authenticity in what they're saying. And so that takes practice. And so you might, if you start learning these points and you start eavesdropping on these points, like consciously, like you put on your like storytelling goggles, right? Like, let me see, I'm gonna find some storytelling goggles so you remember it. Okay, so like you put on your storytelling goggles, right? And you're like, I'm gonna listen to stories today. Like either I'm gonna hear my family speaking, or I'm gonna listen to something or podcast or something. Put on those goggles and listen and be like, take notes. Like what is making this a good story? And then start applying that to your stories. And then visually the same way, like with objects, right? Like, okay, like I'll show you an object. This is something that I'm thinking about for like what will be in my next story, like my next talk or whatever, a couple of objects. Okay, so I had long hair, and there's the photo they were using had me with long hair. I've been growing out my hair for 10 years, so this long curly hair. But when I was in the hospital, they had me on morphine. So I was pretty much asleep for a month. And when I came out of the hospital, my hair had turned into one big dreadlock. Like literally, I looked like, if you guys know the reggae band Steel Pulse, there's like the guy with the one big dreadlock coming off of his head. And I was gonna leave it, and I kept it for a while, but I'll show you the dreadlock. Like I had to cut it off eventually. Like I think I left it for a few months, but like this is the object that will be the beginning of like me telling my testimony of being in the hospital, being on the morphine, getting one dreadlock, right? Like, like one big dreadlock coming up the side of my head like that. So like think of the objects. Another object that comes into like visual play, like I was in a county hospital, so it was kind of crazy. So like for safety, at one point I had to make like a prison style shank out of 2 pencils, because I had like a room was in. So like these kinds of things, like these little objects that happen in your daily life, that come about in your daily life from your existing, from your living, is really important. Another project I'm working on is this little music tote. So this little music tote is a box. I love boxes, I was telling you. A box full of, show you guys, little records, vinyls that are called 45s. They're the little ones. But this little box is a project I'm working on called Music My Mom Played While cleaning the house. So I'm trying to collect all the songs I remember her, like a playlist, essentially, like you would have on Spotify or whatever, but in the form of these little 45 records. So these kinds of things, which are things that happen in our everyday, again, like our habits, people's habits around us, like start thinking about those things and looking at those things, seeing how they could tell stories, how the objects within those, from those things, you could pull those things out to be kind of visual signifiers for your storytelling.
Mario, thank you so much for being here with us tonight and for sharing your work with us and talking with us. It's been an incredible opportunity. And if we were all in the room together, I'd invite everyone to thank me with you for being here. And yeah, incredible.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Wendy, again for your support. Thank you to Carla for her support on this end. And if any of the grad students that are going to be visiting me tomorrow are here, I'll see you all tomorrow. Peace.
Sounds great. Thank you, Mario. Goodbye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.